All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen MacFarlane. I lead global revenue at Pigment. And today I'm joined by Aamir Zargham. Really great to have you on the podcast, Director of Strategic Finance and Insights at Lightspeed Commerce. Now, for those that don't know, Lightspeed helps merchants across retail and hospitality run everything from payments to inventory to omni-channel experiences. Aamir recently transformed a planning process that had hit its limits. You rebuilt it in 60 days, which I'm looking forward to jumping into with you in a little bit. And in doing so, changed not just how the teams work, but how the business makes decisions. It's a leap that many talk about, but a lot of organizations really struggle to implement. And so we're excited to have you on the podcast today to really dive into the way in which you were able to implement this. So Aamir, thanks for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here, Stephen.
Listen, I'd like to just start just for the listeners, give us a bit of an overview of the role, what it means for the business. For a company like Lightspeed, publicly listed, you're certainly navigating a lot of change. You're navigating a shifting business model. You have investors that are certainly looking at both growth and profitability. Give us an insight of what does strategic finance actually mean for Lightspeed, and what are you trying to be for the business?
As you can imagine, company our size and our stage of growth, we're looking for growth and profitability, right? Which means every strategic question becomes one about where does the next dollar go, right? It's about optimal capital allocation, and that's where we're supporting the business in coming to those decisions in the most efficient way possible. The way I see strategic finance is a bridge between aspiration and strategy and the execution that's happening on the ground. And really what makes this function great is speeding up, going from ideation and question all the way to the answers that your leaders need. Internally, when we set success measures for ourselves, we're defining success not by volume of output, number of reports shared, number of analysis done, but really by the influence that we have on the decisions and how that's ultimately created enterprise value.
Interesting. You mentioned you're looking at where does the next dollar go. One of the interesting things about your role is that you're helping the business make decisions, certainly years into the future, while also trying to navigate a landscape that seems to be shifting weekly. How do you balance committing to kind of multi-year, long-term planning, figuring out where that next dollar goes, while also staying immediately responsive to the business changes?
I think if you take a step back and we look at typically how planning is done, you start with a mission, a vision, and a long-term success criteria. That is what we call long-range planning. It's what does my organization look like 3, 5, 10 years down the line, and it's done from a financial perspective. The next step in that is creating what is called a top-down model, a top-down forecast, which is, all right, we know some of the strategic bets we want to take and the plays we want to make. How do we turn that into actionable data and direction for the business? Whether it's sales targets or an improvement in churn or launching in a new geography or a new product. So you go from a top-down, you do bottom-up sales planning, and then you do bottom-up budgeting, where you merge the commercial and financial planning together, which forms your budget. So what I've just described is going from like super high level, 40,000 feet in the air, all the way down to, how much am I spending next month on finance, as an example. So long-term sets the direction, it sets the destination, and then it's all about the journey and how you get there. And that's where having a very tight playback between forecasting and doing outlooks and really the nitty-gritty of in-year, in-month planning helps you course correct slowly. So you're not redefining your goalpost every month. You have a clear vision, and then you have steps that you need to take and like gates that you need to cross.
I'm interested to obviously dive into the long-range planning, as you mentioned, because obviously I think what's really unique, especially for those kind of in market, is you were able to rebuild this in 60 days, which is an incredible accomplishment. Before we kind of jump into that, I'd love to understand the how and really try to get a sense of what happened before this that really spurred on that need for change. You were certainly running this process, this long-range planning process, as you mentioned, almost exclusively in Excel, which I think is pretty common for a lot of organizations. It had taken you about 2 years to mature, as I understand it. You had one employee who kind of really deeply understood it. And some of the bottlenecks operationally is you kind of reached the end of the limit of what it was able to give to you from a capabilities perspective. Can you just paint a picture of how is it actually limiting the business? And what were the impacts of those limits?
Of course, it's not a pretty picture, but I love painting it to anyone who asks. I was that critical point of failure. So I built the original model. It lived in an Excel file and had reached version 1000 over 2 years. 5 massive rebuilds. It was itself part of like a network of Excel files and had dependencies upstream, downstream, to the point where only one person could really work in the file at a time because of the way it was set up. So anytime you're making one change or you're running a new sensitivity, it's like you're on Slack saying, "Hey, can you save version 35 final A?" And then, the other person would go and make their changes. Then I would go and make my changes. So ultimately, to me, it's 3 things coming together. One, it's a trade-off between speed and accuracy, which we willingly had to make. And that was a painful trade-off living in Excel, which meant you want this model to not crash your laptop 5 times a day. You want each input to take less than 5 seconds, right? Because you're dealing with 500-600 different intersections that you're looking at on a regular basis. Second, it really slows down our ability to partner with the business. Good strategic finance is there for you when you have a thought, when you have a question. And oftentimes we'd come back and say, "I'll get back to you end of day. I'll get back to you next week. That model we just can't model that thing. That one thing you asked for, let me spin up a separate analysis for you." So we weren't there for them at that point. So what happens is important decisions are being made without finance in the room. And then third, that concentration, that critical failure risk, it's a real burden on the entire team. So if I'm out, that file's not getting updated. If we're in the middle of busy season, if it's quarter end and we need to see, hey, if I change my trajectory, what is the 3-year impact? I get that slack. And of course, as I mentioned, it's connected upstream, downstream to other systems. So if there is a break in that process, this process ends. It was quite painful.
Those are common usage patterns, right, that we hear of a lot. I want to just double click. You mentioned the decision point between kind of speed and accuracy and how you had to kind of figure out which is going to be the ascending priority for you in the organization. A lot of companies are held back from moving away from Excel, as an example, simply because there's either a fear of time or effort or the risk involved in kind of undertaking such a significant overhaul. You did it in 60 days. How?
There's 4 aspects to this. Planning ahead. I had 2 years. The map was in my head. I knew how to bend this thing before it broke and how we were using it. That really helped. So we had our dimensionality sorted out, how we'd like to do versioning, security, all that good stuff, right? Even down to what our outputs look like. The second was really going in with an empowerment mindset. So for the first time, I brought in 2 other people into this process. And we went together on that journey, along with, honestly, a very, very talented solutions architect that was co-building with us. And finally, it was a shared sense of this is painful, but we were equipped with, I got this from your sales team, the art of the possible. We could start thinking out loud, start dreaming a bit about what can be possible. So we didn't just move from Excel into Pigment in 60 days. It actually looked quite different on day 60. Much faster, more sophisticated, more granular. And that was just the starting point. And we've come a long way from there. The fourth, and I think this is the most important, is Pigment for me aligned with my design philosophy. So I tell everyone the way I think of financial modeling is a bit like Legos. You have different pieces, they might not all be the same. You can mix and match and connect. And in Pigment, the idea of blocks just spoke to me. The second we got our hands on, it was ramping up on what we can do was quick. And then it was just once you have the syntax down, once you know, like, okay, I can build 10 blocks this way and the 11th can be different. And then the 12th can be for this other use case. We went from nothing to like 700 different components in 60 days. I think that matters a lot to find something that speaks to how you work and how you think. It really, really helps.
Love hearing the analogy. It's the same analogy our co-founders used in the Series A pitch deck, the Lego model and the block building. So it's great to hear that it resonates. And as you mentioned, the art of the possible and the ability for you to do so much more, I want to just unlock that a little bit because I think it's pretty unique in terms of what you were able to open up. You went from exploring 5 to 10 scenarios to running over 80 complex scenarios. And you did that in just 5 days. That's incredible for any organization to be able to achieve. I think that the concern becomes, as you have that much optionality that's now available to the business, how do you not just navigate a massive guessing game with so many scenarios now at will running across the organization? How do you still give the business something that can strategically guide them as you unlock so much information?
Mm-hmm. I'll add to that list. I did 20 of those from Pearson Airport. And I tell everyone, it's just the power of the thing is quite impressive to me. Look, 3 to 5 is not an impressive number. Neither is 80. When you think of an organization our size, over 3,000 people, we operate across multiple portfolios, multiple revenue streams, multiple countries, multiple nuances, right? 80 is barely the number of levers we're pulling in 1 year. So to me, just having the ability to run all of those what ifs, it's not the 80 that matter, it's the 3 that you go into the meeting with, right? Because you've dotted the I's, crossed the T's. And ultimately, it gives you more texture to your final output. It's all, there's a story, there's a narrative. You've done the proactive work in anticipating the questions your C-suite has before you go into that meeting. Secondly, I'd say there's this element of, yes, there's information overload, but can we distill it down into the key levers? So 80 is just the starting point. How we're thinking about the future, it's way more, and then picking the strongest signal out of those.
As you think about signals, you've talked before about the ability you now have to really sit with leaders and to model different scenarios in real time. Have you noticed that they're now able to ask different questions, as an example, because the models that you have are so capable, and the ability for them to interact with it in real time is changing the way that they have to think through the business in general? What's that been like as a result of the way the business has changed?
So I noticed 2 changes. One was a bit more immediate, and the other took some time. So the immediate one is finance starts to be a requirement in the process, not just a separate part of the process. So by being able to really model out the different sensitivities, the scenarios, we're seeing this need for leaders to say, hey, like, I need finance in the room, from ideation to the strategy, to the financials, down to the execution and tracking. Second, I think, going back to your previous question, what happened is the cost of what ifs went down for us, right? The amount of effort we had to put in to create a new scenario and a version. In this case, it's the cost of curiosity starts to go down, and the business starts to feel that. So in the past, where you'd have leaders ask the safer questions because they knew, hey, it's going to take them a week, it's going to take a few days, give me the basics, give me the need to know. Now, when I open this up live and they say, hey, if I do this one thing and it reduces churn by X and it costs me Y, what does my P&L look like? I make a few changes, and the thing is, it's like a living, breathing thing. They see the numbers change, we have an output, we have a conversation. So the nature of engagement, I'd say, has changed.
I love the way you framed it. The cost of curiosity goes down. I think it's a helpful way for just the layman to really kind of think about the way that this can unlock the business. You've described the transformation that you've undergone at Lightspeed in a unique way, where you're kind of moving planning from this back-end administrative burden, where you're the only individual who can really kind of see and articulate the value, to it becoming the strategic competitive advantage, which I think is a unique way to think through just long-range planning as an example. You certainly have a very clear vision of where this goes next for you. You've talked about this full spectrum planning, which I think would be interesting just to kind of describe for us. You've talked about bringing RevOps into the very same environment. We're seeing more and more companies in the market really try to unlock the same capabilities across the business, across the organization in this way. Why do you think that is, trying to bring these worlds together that historically were somewhat divergent? And what are the challenges that you've seen in making that work and making that successful?
So there's three different things. I'll try to answer them individually. I don't think we're at a place where we can call this a strategic competitive advantage yet, but we're getting there. So with our initial implementation, we did long range planning, and now we're moving more and more of our models and forecasts, including our financial in-year planning and our sales planning that's done by our RevOps team. The reason more companies are doing it, bringing them in the same ecosystem, sharing the same infrastructure, it's the cost of not doing so is really high. It's painful, right? I think of, one of our planning cycles, we ended up with version 31 of our sales targets and version 60 of our budget. And then you're running a base scenario, a bear scenario, a bull scenario, and then a risk adjusted say. It gets complicated. And when everything's done manually, imagine each of those 31 versions that I spoke about, they're G sheets that are being, we're given a signal. The sheet is ready. Download the sheet, translate it into your Excel, turn it into a CSV, upload it into your planning tool, run a report, and play back the impact to me. Let alone even actually daring to think, hey, can we do this differently? Can we change our model? Can you change your model? Can we find a different way of alignment? Like, we just didn't have the bandwidth to ask those questions because we're just too busy pushing files around, but doing QA, making sure the numbers are tied. Hey, that one intersection's wrong. Oops, version 32, here we come. So just in that alone, in the administrative burden, you lose months of the year, right? You lose a lot of time, which is better spent generating insights and really thinking about what's happening on the ground. So the vision by bringing what I call full spectrum planning and trademark bending is you go from your top down to your bottom up to your in-year plan, all connected together. They might still be siloed in that you're modeling things differently at different stages. As you can imagine, I'm not going to model a 5-year plan at the country, merchant, complexity, currency level. I'll aggregate it. But as long as I can translate it for RevOps at a lower level of aggregation, as long as they can take that and aggregate it to a sort of medium level for our in-year forecasts, and if that can then speak back to the top down, you haven't necessarily changed the models, but you've connected them. And now they're consuming the same, if not similar, if not the same data across, your operating metrics, your revenue figures, your bookings, your billings, down to how you share workforce data, how you share, your talent pipeline. So to me, that really speeds up engagement across teams, highlighting, hey, something's wrong. Are you seeing it? I'm seeing it too. And then the fix isn't, I'll give you another sheet. It's, I'll run my integration and the whole thing will just resolve itself.
As you say it, it comes across very forward thinking. And I think there's probably a lot of finance leaders that either struggle to see that future vision, but maybe just help the average finance leader who might be thinking through a legacy EPM offload, some type of migration. What should they be thinking about? How should they at least start to tackle this? Perhaps to keep it simple, what advice would you give them?
There's two elements to this. One is do you suffer from a platform issue or a process issue? So I think there's an element of introspection that needs to happen. Sometimes it's a bit of both. It's a bit chicken and egg because we found out uh, our processes were built around our platform. So our legacy EPM. And that's a hard cycle to get out of. It's a hard cycle to also start to imagine what different could look like, what better could look like. So if you're at that stage where the platform is the limiting factor, then I think there's three elements. One, you can't move a bad process into a shiny new tool and expect better results. You will reach you'll make the same mistakes more efficiently is all that's going to happen. For us, it's planning. It's really knowing this is what I need my model to do. And here's the data that's available to me. Am I able to build it in my system today, in my tool today? If not, it's a tool limitation, right? And of course, it's all relative. So there's an element of sometimes you have slightly messy data. Sometimes the model's just not sophisticated, but sometimes the tool doesn't scale either. So planning ahead, as I mentioned with the LRP also, we knew what we were getting into. So it went end to end. We're doing our second implementation now, which is more of our models, more of our in-year stuff. And we're finding, every couple of hours spent planning would have had like a 4-to-1 return during the design and the build phase. So that's one. Number two, I think start small. Definitely start, but dream big. So you won't succeed if you don't have a vision for what good looks like. And you might not get there in a year, maybe not even in 5. But as long as you have that long-term vision and mission set out, you can incrementally improve.
Just to echo back, I think it's a helpful framing. Think through the platform versus the process to understand the attack strategy, and then start small, but dream big. If we could I'd love to sit on it for just a moment longer, because I think what's really interesting is the way you think through it. You mentioned earlier how you even built this, almost like this empowerment framework to bring others along on this journey with you. I'm just curious, how did you almost defrost the organization to recognize we're going to go through a pretty significant transformation? Anything unique there that you did just to try to get either the finance team or the organization in general? And maybe it's as simple as, hey, start small, but anything that you did as you kind of reflect and look back on it?
Definitely start small. Start small and have things to show for the progress you're making. So once we did the LRP and post day 60, we were in our top-down planning cycle, and it went through it. We pushed it to its limits, and without really knowing, will this break in the middle of like when we need to send board materials out, as an example? It went through. It was there for us, but during that process, people start to see, hey, what is this tool that you're sharing your screen? Why are the numbers moving? You just change like your cost of acquisition, and the whole thing's reacting to it. So we started small, but we then had a few users who could be promoters for us within finance. But for me, that was getting our VP in Pigment from day one and saying, look, this is the new tool. Forget Excel. This is where you go for your data. This has everything you need, just not at the really granular level. Here's your board. Here are your versions. Here are your toggles. Here's your filters. And then you start to see a snowball effect. You bring more people in. So once that was successful, I'm like, okay, it works for a VP. It works for an executive audience. Let's bring a few more people from FP&A. And they're like, whoa, I remember one comment was, it's unfair how fast this is. So just being able to switch versions, which is akin to opening two Excel files, and then just seeing them side by side and saying version A minus version B. These are small things, but that's where the pain is. So you need to start surfacing it. So eventually the business is ready and they say, okay, we need this. Like, we need this same stuff in our day to day. And then you get that critical mass. You're like, okay, we're now moving our models, our data flows, but we're approaching it slowly. We're rethinking how we ingest data. So we went from 50 different sources across the organization. Some of those sources would be emails and people slacking you files, to saying, before we even implement, we're going to build our data warehouse for finance. We're going to get our tables in there. We're going to schedule them so that when we're ready to move, we can leverage, just the built-in Pigment connector. And, last week we did our first run of that. We went from 7 hours that it would take one person to run month end to 23 minutes. And the first run we did as a team. So it was 10 of us that would do the month end. Like 1 hour, we're going to do this. And it was NetSuite, refreshed, BigQuery, file 1, file 2, file 3, worked. It was, you start seeing people dream. They start saying, okay, I can see month ends like a day quicker. So I've gained back 10 days a year, right? Like that starts to add up.
That's incredible improvement. So I hear you say, as you mentioned, start small, demonstrate the quick wins, develop internal champions to kind of help you go on this journey. Obviously at Lightspeed, you've really helped obviously go through a significant transformation. At the same time, the market's going through a significant transformation. How have you thought about kind of integrating AI into the way that strategic finance works at Lightspeed today?
We're going slow, deliberately going slow. AI suffers from the same, the same thing that other analyses, tools, platforms do. Bad data in, bad data out. So as part of this transformation, what we're trying to do is to be systems first. And that means end-to-end thinking about finding the strongest signal in our planning pipeline. So to me, AI sits at the tail end of that. To me, being AI ready means being able to feed it the right signal to get the most accurate, magnified version of that at the end of the day. You might say we're trying to be AI ready before we're, AI excited in a manner of speaking. We are testing different use cases, your usual suspects, your BVA, your prelim analysis, drafting the what happened, what changed, outliers, slides, writing, all that stuff. But really, to me, the 2 times I've had, you can call goosebump moments with AI, not a lot, but 2 of them happened within Pigment. First was when I saw the analyst agent for the first time. I did a demo with our systems architect, and it just felt different. And the reason is it was close to home. Every day you hear, development workflows and, Git commits and all of those are going up. But to finance, like month end is a big part of what we do. So seeing it dimensionalized, systemized, and running end to end on a schedule, especially with the agent and its supervisor talking to themselves, I was like, it's not the future yet, but if our system's set up with the right dimensions, with the right data, this can become a superpower. And then the second thing, of course, is looking at how we can leverage other tools, like through MCP connections, through Claude, or through, we're testing out a new tool called Glean these days. How do we leverage our system in different ways, more creative ways? But definitely we're going slow, deliberately with AI.
Okay. I like, again, the framework that you've given where it's really like AI ready, as you're kind of thinking through the AI excitability as well. One of the things you just mentioned that, certainly we're excited about is the ability to kind of bring agents into the finance workflows, which is what you've just described. I think it's an important distinction. There's a lot of talk around efficiency and automation. Bringing agents into the finance workflows really represent the next paradigm shift that we think it can drive. As you think about this trade-off that you mentioned earlier between speed and accuracy, as you think about, the ability for you to kind of delegate the task out, as you mentioned with the analyst agent, what does responsible delegation with AI actually look like in practice?
I think you phrased it perfectly. Stephen, it's delegate the task, not the thought. So that's how we're thinking about it. And, just quickly going back, I mentioned 2 times I really saw AI changing how we work. One was the analyst agent, the second was the modeler agent. And when we used it, we're like, okay, this is something that can make the system smarter if we leverage it more. So we started doing that. We're like, okay, here's how I've built my model. I'd like you to go in and update the metadata, the comments, the descriptions of things, so that the next time I call on you to make an improvement or an update to my model, it's easier. But going back to agents, I think I'd like to make the distinction between automation and using an agent. One is necessarily a very mechanical task that's being automated. So step 1, step 2, step 3, it's always the same. Agents, there's an element of freedom, for lack of a better word. There's an element of making decisions across that workflow that you've given it. So I see this as, the busy work getting eliminated. Honestly, I go back to how can I get this agent to give me the strongest signal that would have otherwise taken a lot of manual, let me filter this table this one way. Oh, there's an outlier here. Is this outlier also in this other metric? That sort of work. I think to me, if I can open up a dashboard and see, okay, we roll the model forward, you have a 1 month of data. The model has context on how we did all other analyses over the last couple of months. Here's its version of the strongest signal, the strongest thing to look at. That to me is where it adds value, and that to me is where we'd want the handoff. Is okay. You shouldn't need to be 100% AI. At some point, you take over, and to make sense of the why and bring in the business knowledge and the reality of what's happening from an industry point of view. That's where I'd make the sort of switch from AI first to people first.
Okay, it's clear to me as I hear you talk through it that Lightspeed is very much first principles thinking in the way in which you're approaching this. If someone listening wanted to start using AI in their planning process today, what's the first thing that you'd recommend they should get in place?
I'd say first start with don't commit to one tool. There, for developers, you have open code. Then you have other tools which give you access to a lot of different models. We're early, right, in the AI space. So not necessarily commit to a tool, but do commit to how you plan around it. If your data is not good enough for your own people today, if it's painful for them to do a BVA, throwing AI at it won't solve the problem. I think deliberate moves are needed. So there are automations today that organizations don't do. Doesn't mean you throw AI at it. You just do that automation better. I think it's that simple. It's what are you trying to solve, and is AI the right tool to solve that? Right.
I think as you've kind of described it, like it's very clear, like the pace of change is happening rapidly. And I think going back to fundamentals and first principles, as you're mentioning, is probably the most important thing that, an organization can do. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on what it means for the people involved. You've talked about the technology. You've talked about kind of the team in which you have in place, the way you're thinking about it organizationally. You've taken on a significant transformation at Lightspeed, technically, organizationally, culturally. What did you learn? Let's start with just yourself during that process.
So I took pride in the fact that I was one of the very few people at Lightspeed that knew our model inside out, end to end, lead to cash, 3-statement, 5 years, 10 years, you name it. I knew how it worked. What I found through this process was letting go of that and bringing people in, empowering them, really elevates the entire team and the conversation. So we got rid of a critical point of failure. Now it's owned by 3 people instead of 1. But it's allowed me to elevate the conversation around our strategy and how we communicate that back to the business, how we iterate, how we plan together. And I've seen my team rise to the occasion, right? They come to me with, hey, like, I don't like how we do this one thing. And they know how to think in systems now, which is leverage I would have otherwise not thought to have existed after going through this transformation. So I think that's the biggest thing is making myself less relevant was probably the path to success for this project.
It sounds counterintuitive, right? Making yourself less relevant. But I think the way in which you're trying to drive it forward in terms of thinking in systems is a unique paradigm shift. So take it from yourself, and now let's extrapolate that maybe further. Like certainly the landscape and the role within finance is changing. In your view, what's the skill that will separate the finance leader who really thrives in the next, call it 5 years, from those who get left behind?
So there's 3 things, and times are changing fast. One, as you alluded to, is a systems first way of thinking. And to me, systems are not tools, right? System, the way I think about it, is your people, your processes, your platform, which in this case would be your tool and Pigment, and your partnerships. That to me is a whole system. So having leaders that can think in that way, very deliberately around how they're hiring, how they're enabling those teams through their processes and through their platforms, and ultimately leading to better, stronger partnerships in the business. That to me is systems way of thinking. And very much, I think, will differentiate good versus great. The second is it's really bringing in this culture of empowering people. I think of our team at Lightspeed and FP&A and strategic finance. We've got CPAs, CFAs, engineers, data analysts. There's even an astrophysicist on the team. So we're no longer limited by you studied finance and you worked in finance and now you're in finance. It's you bring a certain skill, a certain way of solving problems that is relevant to what we're doing. So to be able to empower them to think a bit differently, but then leverage their experiences and their skill and their knowledge in novel ways, I think is where you'll find real enterprise value. I think third, I'm going to pause here because I forgot my third. So you have your systems way of thinking. You've got how you empower your people. Third is communication. I read this the other day and it just stuck with me. If what you're sharing if it takes your audience longer to read what you wrote than it took you to write it, there's something wrong. And that's what's happening with the AI. There's, AI slop. It's like, do this for me. It's like essays and documents. And I'm sure you've seen it as well. Being an effective communicator to me is the ability to distill and synthesize what's important, why it's important, and everything else that goes with it. Definitely, you leverage AI the same way and you get it to shine the same way you get people to shine. Is you need to be clear in what you are asking them to do, why you're asking them to do something, and to what end. It's the context matters. So I think those 3 things combined really will differentiate people that otherwise might be, they might be experts in one particular area or might be hyper specialized in one skill. But if they can't traverse across these 3 different, axes, that will differentiate great from good.
I've heard it said ideas easy to be understood are easy to spread, which is much the same as the way in which you're describing it. So systems thinking, empowerment, culture, and communication is how you describe it.
Yeah.
Great. What about if you were hiring a strategic finance leader today? If you were to just think, what does it look like as far as the difference in background or maybe skill sets that are more relevant today than they would have been 5 years ago, let's say? What would you look for in a strategic finance leader today?
Of course, I think it depends. It's relative to the state of an organization and the strategic finance team. But I think the most relevant thing today is, can you speak finance and data fluently? Because oftentimes teams are starving for decision-ready data to generate your decision-ready insights so that your leaders can make data-educated decisions. That's ultimately how you're influencing the output at scale. So someone that can, of course, think strategically and in systems, but also knows upstream how things work, right? Metrics, definitions, master data management. A lot of these things are becoming relevant to finance of all teams. As you think about it, we're typically at the tail end of most processes and also the inception point for a lot of processes. So any defect or deficiency in data flowing through gets magnified big time. And that's what then creates last minute, fire drills, or like that one metric's off and go upstream and your table needs to be fixed. So I think that's what's needed, is how do you get someone that understands where data comes from and how to consume it and how to translate data into an insight, into impact.
Mm-hmm. Aamir, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate the insight and the time that you've given to us as we kind of just think through what it means to transform not only your business but also yourself in this new world, and certainly how to lead a modern finance transformation. So, just want to thank you so much for being on the program with us and for the time you've given us.
Thank
today.
you, Stephen.